Great. Hello, everyone. It takes, I think, our attendees a little bit of time to get connected to the system. So we're going to give them a couple of minutes, or a minute at least, to do that. So this is the fourth meeting of the Nantucket Short-Term Rentals Work Group. And Peter, looks like you have a question or comment.
Yeah, I do have a question. But before I ask my question, I'd like to thank the members of this committee for the dedication and diligence that they've had. However, I think everybody should be aware that Julia Lindner is a paid participant in this group and represents Act Now in their agenda. Now I'll go into my question. As Mary and Julia have already chosen an article for town meeting to support, and they've both signed the article that was presented to potentially be on the warrant. I'd like to hear specifically why they're both still coming to the meetings, because we're here to put together an article and it's already done. And secondly, I'd like to hear Julia's comments as to her use of the information in the court cases against STR operators.
Okay, Julia, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. I don't think it's so. There are multiple short-term rental articles that are being presented, and it's unclear sort of at this point who's supporting which one, but there are obviously groups behind each of these articles, or a set of articles. I think that it's a natural process. Like, I don't think that this work group should, would have viewed itself as having the exclusive right over what was being brought to town meeting. And I think we've said for a while that we were concerned that this work group would, be in a position to bring something. That being said, we're happy to, I'm certainly an organization is happy to set that aside and continue down this path of trying to make something work with this for the work group.
But you did sign that petition, correct?
I personally did not sign the petition, but other members of our organization did.
Maybe I misunderstood. Okay, but the other members have. Okay. So I'm a little confused. We do have an article that was submitted by the Act Now thought process. I don't know who exactly wrote, whether the person who submitted it's on Act Now or not. But
so let me make it clear. Emmy Kilvert is an independent sponsor, is an independent person, is one person of many who are supporting this article. And we as an organization are also supporting it.
Okay, so she is not a member of Act Now?
No.
Okay. And so let's go on to the next question. The next question is, are you using information that you're gleaning from these meetings in the court cases that you are presently active in? Because we've seen some of the transcripts of the cases, and there's stuff taken directly from our meetings, and it's quoted that it was from the short-term rental group.
Peter, Act Now is not a plaintiff in any of the court cases. Yes, we are supporting the abutters of commercial short-term rentals and asking the town to enforce local zoning bylaws. Whatever is happening in those meetings, in those court cases, is not something that I'm actively working on.
I'm sure the direction from your attorneys is that way, but
Peter, the attorney is representing the abutters directly, and I am not involved in those client privilege relationships.
Okay, is Act Now involved?
Act Now is supporting these cases, but like I said, I would be the one who would be in day-to-day activity. I have no idea how this relates to the whole process of the work group. So I'm, really unclear.
Is Act Now paying for the attorneys? I mean,
In some of the cases that we are partnered with others, in some of the cases we are paying. I mean, again, I don't know how this is relevant to the overall conversation. These are topics that have been out there for a while.
well, the relevance is, I think that number one is, you've already accomplished your goal. You have an article. Number two is we need to watch what we say if your attorneys and yourself are taking down every word and potentially using them in a court case.
Peter, these are public meetings,
I'm not disagreeing with that.
right? And so, like I said, whatever is being said on court cases, you probably know more than I do actually, because I haven't read those dockets. So, I think anything we say in these meetings is obviously going to be, it's recorded.
Okay, that's enough.
All right, thank you. So I want to direct our attention to our agenda for tonight. I know, look, this is a contentious topic and there's lots of other stuff going on outside of this work group. This work group has a task. This work group's task is to see if we collectively, the 9 voting members with input from our liaison non-voting member from the Board of Health, and whatever comments, public comments and input we get along the way, as well as all the experts that we have helping us out. The task of this group is to try to develop guidelines for STRs for Nantucket through either new bylaws and or zoning. And that's what we're focused on. So all the other questions people have about STRs, all the citizen petition articles, whatever they may be, that's not the work of this group. We're not going to talk about them directly. People can get ideas from those. If there are things in those you like and you want to bring them to the table for our group to talk about, for trying to reach consensus agreements, great, right? But we're going to keep our process separate. What we're trying to do is understand what the data tells us, understand the legal constraints, understand what zoning allows us and what general bylaws allow us to do and not do, and drawing from all of that and from the goals and the things that people think are important, we're going to try to see what we can do to come up with at least 7 out of 9 agreeing on a pathway forward. Our goal is initially, I think we have already let go of the goal of trying to get a zoning article for this town meeting. We have not let go of the goal of trying to get a general bylaw for this town meeting. There is still time for this group to do that. Maybe this group comes up with a general bylaw that goes for this town meeting paired with a zoning bylaw that is shared and discussed, but is not yet on the warrant because the timeline doesn't allow it to do so. And that could go to a special town meeting. So that is what this group is doing. And I wanted, to the extent we possibly can, keep our group focused on that. So I think we have our job set out for us, and it's an important one. And it's, I think we have a lot of potential. So that's what I want to do. Julia?
On the question of the zoning article, Stacy, to sort of go back to what Peter said super briefly, our goal is not to put something forward. Our goal is I think is a shared goal among this group, which is to get something that the voters will support and the community can support, right? And so I know you've mentioned the zoning it's a little tougher because there are hearings and whatnot, but are we sure there's no time in the timeline? Like, are we sure? Because, there's a lot of wiggle room in by the printer gets the warrant at the end of March. Like it's not that soon.
Well, I mean, because there have to be public hearings. I did ask for a drop dead deadline for a zoning article, and I don't think I got an answer to that question. I don't know. I don't see Megan here. Adrian, do you have an answer to that question?
I do not, Stacy, but I can make a note of that for Megan, and we'll
Okay,
get back to
David,
you all.
do you
I
have an
think,
answer to that
uh,
question?
It was in, Megan Trudell made that statement in one of our meetings. If you go watch one of the recordings, I'm pretty sure she said mid-December was for zoning. That's
But
what she
just,
said.
you know, and I know other people have their hands raised, so I just want to, you know, my little experience doing this, working in the town, was that, you know, some of the planning board motions and articles came pretty late in the game in terms of when the finance committee had to approve them and whatnot. So anyways, I just wanted to see if you had a final answer or not, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, I did specifically ask that question
Mhm.
of the select board. Their answer for the general bylaw was basically January 18th is when the final day that the select board, and they said maybe that could stretch a week.
Mhm.
And that was what I heard for the general. In terms of for the zoning, I don't know. David, is your hand up to answer this question? You're muted, David.
So I think the drop dead date for the select board is sometime in January. And if I recall correctly, the concern was that zoning articles take a little more time than that because they have to go through a process. And so that would be earlier. But I think more importantly is a couple things. One is when we get the data, is that going to afford us time? Because I don't think we can really make any decisions without a good amount of data. You know, and the second thing is we should be careful with rushing and be more focused on giving the best product possible. So, and I think the community would support that concern about not rushing. And then it comes down to when we get the data and when we can all process it. If the data doesn't come in late, then we won't, I don't think, have time.
All right, well, I will come to John and Kathy in a moment, but just to be clear, since I haven't yet talked about today's agenda, which is to talk about data. So we are going to hear from Granicus today about the data that they have so far, and the group will get a chance to see how well does this data help us answer the questions that the group has named about the relationship between STRs and the issues that you all have named that you care about. Right? You care about the availability of housing, you care about the cost of housing, you care about the neighborhood qualities and all of these sorts of things. We've got all our list of policy goals and we will hear today, how close are we on the data? So I will still get an answer on what is our deadline, just so we know what it is. And I know there's disagreement on the group, or at least not everybody's aligned on how important it is to try to push this forward in time to be on this season's town meeting. I am taking as my charge that that's our goal, if we can do it, and that if we can't, we keep going. We're not going to do a lousy job because we're in a rush, but we're also not going to kick back. We're going to do the best we can to move forward. So let me just name our meeting objectives and our agenda, and then John and Kathy, I'll take your comments. So we are going to review data. We are going to start to talk about input that I asked people to share on some initial ingredients for the stew we are going to start making, the policy stew that we are going to put together starting at our next meeting in person on the 5th. And we'll talk a little bit about other next steps as well. Right, so this is our rough timeline. This can, the amount of time on each of these things can adjust depending on how much time we have and need on data. But this is roughly what we are aiming for in our agenda. Our video norms, again, please raise your hands. Primary members on video, mute when you're not speaking. Feel free to use chat. Meeting is being recorded, and we'll get to the public Q&A at the end of the meeting. And our ground rules, I do ask everyone, I know there's tension, but I want everyone to treat everyone else with respect, please. Please be as constructive, civil, on topic, sincere, open, and concise as you can. Okay, with that, John, let me take your question or comment.
Okay, yeah, you can hear me okay? I'm off mute.
Yes.
Yeah, so just two quick things. I do have some information later on about the availability of local data from NARAB, but I'll hold that till after Jeffrey's had, his time. Just to say that, the data, they are wanting to be very helpful, but the data is not going to be here in time for any article for this town meeting. It would have to be for a special one, but we'll cover that later. But what I do want to update everyone on is that I've talked to a couple of people this week about the concept of we will not have an article for the May town meeting, but by then we could have a very clear presentation on perhaps even what our article recommendation is going to be at a special meeting in September. And what I asked specifically is, could we have 20 minutes at the beginning of the next town meeting to address everyone that's there with where we're at as a work group? What are we leaning towards? Do we have any firm ideas yet? And by May, obviously, if we don't have them by May, then we're never going to have them. So where I've got this to at the moment is Sarah Olger, the moderator of the town meeting, is going to talk to town council to see if there is a legal way for us to do an update in the town meeting of what our article is starting to look like. Because if that is possible, then for me anyway, that takes a little heat out of the situation in terms of having to try to get something, and anything that we do for this town meeting, the scheduled town meeting, is going to have to be done without data. And that means we should not do it. We absolutely should not do it. With that, so I haven't got a clear answer yet for everyone, but there is at least a thought that we could get time on the town meeting as a formal update as the work group that town meeting this year, approved to be formed and to take this task on. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. Kathy?
Thank you. I just wanted to really quickly state my understanding of the process for the bylaws for the town meeting warrant. So somebody can tell me if I'm saying this wrong, but my understanding is that when these citizens articles come in, or any article comes in, but the citizens articles are in now, they have to go through a review by the town council. So town council has to vet every one of the 26 that are there, and then they get passed along, I think, to the FinCom. Now maybe Peter Schaefer can update us on that. I think that has to go through that meeting process because they have to weigh in on them. And the select board review is actually the last step. So it's not like, oh, you just have to get everything ready by the day before the select board meeting and you're good. No, you have to get it ready, I think, quite a bit ahead of that so that it can get through the other steps. So that's really just my thoughts there. And then the other thing was I listened into the select board and the FinCon meetings this week. And one of the things that came up at the select board was a concern that because it was pretty obvious that we would probably not have an article to go to town meeting this spring from this work group, that perhaps the select board should produce one, something that to try and do what, the same result that what John is suggesting would have, is to have something, not necessarily a warrant article, but something for town meeting to show where we are, why we are where we are, and so forth. So they were looking to try to do some kind of a stopgap. They decided not to make a decision on that right away. And they will see how things go with this group. But I just wanted to pass that along, because that's what I heard them say. And I also heard them say that they preferred not rushing. They preferred doing it right and doing the work that we needed to do. So just sharing that information. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. John, did you put your hand back up?
Yes, just to respond to Kathy. Kathy, what my understanding is that is the route we would get our 20 minutes or half an hour, whatever it is for the select board to put forward an article that basically says, here is the short-term rental work group update. That would be the way to get it on as our update. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, Kathy, is your hand still up for? Okay. All right. So we want to approve meeting summaries. And I think you all should have gotten our draft November 8th meeting summary. So let's start there. Anyone want to?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting summary for November 8th.
Great, thank you. Any second?
Second.
Okay. Everybody in favor, please raise your virtual or your real hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. I think we've got everybody. Great. Okay. Samanish, have we sent around I don't think we've approved the data subgroup meeting summaries, have we?
No, we haven't.
Okay, have we sent them around?
I don't believe so, not to the full group, but
Okay, so let's make sure we do that for next time.
okay, great.
Okay. Okay, so with that, let me hand this, sorry, John, is there something else you want?
No, sorry.
Okay. With that, let me hand this over to Jeffrey.
I think we just got an email from Jeffrey saying my Zoom is crashing. I'll be on in
Great.
1 second.
Okay. Perfect timing for that. Well, while we're waiting for that, I think, sorry, Peter Kahn, do you want to just let people know your timing for tonight? And just so nobody will be surprised when your counterpart takes over.
Wedding anniversary, long ago, even before the establishment of this committee, promised my wife a dinner. So at 6:15 or thereabouts, I'll back out of here, and my colleague Bill Gardner, who's the number 2 on this, will join you, and he's been following this all along. So we won't miss a beat.
Perfect, thanks. So just so people know that once Peter needs to step out, Bill will step in, and he will be sitting in that advisory committee for non-voting taxpayers seat.
And I think Jeffrey.
Is Jeffrey back?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we're in some thunderstorms, so I occasionally just burst into flames. So I apologize.
Sorry to hear that, Jeffrey. So we're handing this over to you now, I think, to share with the group where you are on data.
Great. Well, once you, let's see, sure. I think you have to enable participant sharing.
You're all set.
Great. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Great. So I wanted to give an update. We'll call this a little bit of a part one, I suppose, as we'll get into, and I think as John alluded to, there is still plenty of data out there that I think gets at some of the important questions that people are interested in. Still, we have quite a bit of data, and I tried to frame this in a way that answers some of the questions that I've been getting. And I really do appreciate, and I know I joked a little bit before this meeting started, I do appreciate people emailing me. People have been very generous with data sources, with things that they find, things that they think are going to be helpful, and they are helpful. So, my email is on here. I do appreciate getting them, and I do use them when I can find ways to do that. I will ask if anyone ever emails me about data, if you include any sort of data, try to name the source. Some people have sent me data that doesn't have a source attached, and so I either need to go track that down, or I can't use it unless I have that sort of attribution. So that's just something to keep in mind. Once again, you've seen my face before and what Granicus does. So the big update is that we have gone to, I think, 5 or 6 of the largest real estate listing sites that are located in Nantucket, because people have pointed out how important that is to the local market. And so the number of units and the number of listings is quite a bit more. That I believe the last time I presented this number, which is more in the 1600. Some of these are still being processed totally. There may be some duplicates, but we think this is a lot closer number to the reality on the ground. And I think the reality that everyone anticipates still, that is a very, very high percentage of entire homes, which is to be expected. And the average nightly rate is much closer to, I think, what a lot of people believe it to be, which is around $1,000. We're still working through one very important piece, which is getting the parcel ID that we collect to match the very, very specific form that the GIS of the assessor processes everything in. That's going to unlock a lot more data, and I'll get into that a little bit at the end. But right now, this is the this is the count. And so, talking about some of these questions, one that come up is really about capacity and the number of bedrooms. And what piqued my interest in reading this is, I noticed in the data the median listing count, so the exact 50, the one that I'm using 4th grade geometry, but what divides your data set into half, the median capacity was 8 occupants. It's also the mode, it's the most common number, but that was not the median or the mode for the number of bedrooms. And in fact, those seem to be almost at odds with each other. 8 people in a 1-bedroom place seems like a lot. So I wanted to do a little bit more digging and to understand why that was a number we were seeing. So this is on your left, the number of bedrooms in these units, advertised bedrooms, I should mention. On the right is their listing capacity. So what they list the number of people that can stay for. And as you see, in general, 67% are 1-bedroom units, and then sort of moving upwards from there. And on the right, it's a little bit all over the place. You see bumps at even numbers. Theoretically, these should in some way align, and they don't align necessarily. But I wanted to kind of keep going and understand, what is this showing me? Because it has implications for when we talk about how much is the appropriate capacity for any particular house. And I've talked to a lot of people who have somewhat peculiar houses, total open floor plan, and they're like, how many bedrooms do we have? How many people would I be allowed to accommodate? And so I wanted to get sort of even further into this and understand it sort of deeper. This is a graph of those same units in terms of bedrooms. You see you have a large tail of one bedroom. I think part of this is a data issue. I believe on some of the sites that we have looked at, the bedrooms is kind of the afterthought. And a lot of people put more of their emphasis on the capacity. And so I think some of those one bedrooms are mislabeled in their own listings. But you can see it's a little bit of a hockey stick as you get up to some of the higher numbers. Those blue lines will come into play in just a second in terms of looking at capacity compared to the number of advertised bedrooms. Peter.
It just that I think don't waste your time about the one bedroom. We don't really have one bedroom rental out homes. There might be a few, but it's very much the minority. Despite what you might have read.
Julia, do you?
Yeah, this is, I think, I mean, I was sort of puzzled until you said, I think there's a data issue.
Yeah.
Because this is counter to a lot of what I've seen so far. Certainly, you know, you may have sites that are maybe out there, but like, let's say you look at AirDNA or you look at the registry, or you look at, you know what I mean? Like that, the one bedroom segment is a smaller segment than the rest of the, you know, the rest of the segment. So you're saying that there may be a portion of the data that is just not giving you either an accurate number of bedrooms?
Yeah, so let me get into this a little bit. So I believe there are some sites where everything is sorted essentially by capacity, right? 15 people, you know, number of people. That will have a bedroom component. I think people put one in because it's the default, but everything is sorted through the capacity. Now, I had to make a choice, and I'll be very upfront about this choice, which is in our data, we have all these one bedrooms and that are listed as one bedrooms. And then you look at the capacity and they don't seem to comport, right? So some of them you could very easily say, okay, yes, this is very clearly a data issue. I think there's one where it's a one bedroom, it can sleep 25. Okay, well, that's not going to work. To be very upfront though, where I draw that line and say these are clearly missing data or data that's been slightly off, I didn't want to just draw that line arbitrarily. So I've included all of that, and you'll actually see that the way that it shakes out is, I'm not going to say unexpected, but let me just keep going, and I think you'll see that in some ways it does sort of solve itself, because I think some of those one bedrooms, even if they are relatively similar to the rest of housing, they get folded into other categories when we look at the differences. So let me just keep going, and then when I get to the end of the section, we can maybe talk a little bit. David, do you have something real fast?
It may be a stupid question, but have you kind of gone through the data and make sure you took duplicates out?
Yes.
So these are all freestanding, non-duplicated.
Yeah, so there are two things. This is listings. So listings will sometimes be related to the same property. So you can't really deduplicate it because they are separate listings, but it's not the same as the physical properties themselves necessarily. Does that make sense? The number of listings is much larger than the number of units because people put their single property on multiple units.
Okay, so but this reflects the listing, not
Correct.
necessarily the property.
Correct.
Okay, so if somebody listed their property 3 different times, you would have 3 units here.
Correct. And we would have both the bedrooms and the number of occupants for all of those.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
John, you got something quick?
Well, it may not be quick, but I'm not sure what kind of conversations you had with NARAB, but they sent me something and it has a specific slide on bedrooms. And, you know, over the last 3 years, 1-bedroom rentals through the local brokers is less than 20%. It's actually 18%. It's 667 of 3,560. So
Yeah.
It seems to me that we should not waste a lot of time on this, because the local data does not in any way support this.
Well, I will say again, let me show you another slide. I think the other thing is their data is related to the properties that they use. And I would suspect that they might have their own skew in the data that they collect because of the types of properties represent. I'll just keep moving forward and we can address this, because I think here's your sleeping capacity. So these are the listings, and you can actually see the little tiny cliffs. I don't know if you can see my arrow.
You can see your arrow.
Okay, good. So that's one. There are a couple that rent to only one person. Sure. 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Odd numbers are not popular. You see a lot more 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and then obviously you go quite high. So what I found interesting is, even if we just use the data as it is, with the known issues to it, those blue lines represent what a theoretical 2 per bedroom plus 2 capacity would be. And this by itself says, obviously, there are some that are over that, there are some that are under it. But I wanted to actually get, even with the data that we have, what does that really mean? So even with the data as it is, over 50% of these listings conform to a 2 per bedroom plus 2 standard. And this has come up quite a bit in people that I've talked to who are very concerned about the capacity changes that they would have, or the inability to continue on renting to the number of people that they have, or just the nuances of our children, people, and all these other things. Yes, Kathy.
Just real quickly, the current regulations that go into effect on January 1st already address this and state what the regulation is. So it's not really of interest, I would think, to us, because it wouldn't affect anything we would generate as a regulation. It already is regulated.
Sure.
So I'm curious, why would, this is data we really don't need. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I do think it's important to understand also where people are in relation to that standard, and that to understand part of the market, you know, the units that are under that standard, that are not meeting that standard, that are actually having fewer people than they are allowed, it's a very, very particular type. It is almost exclusively the small number of 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. The units that are greater than that standard, that are not meeting that specific standard as it is, are on average 4 people over, but are still quite spread out. So the deviation on that is much higher. So it speaks to there's a sort of difference within the market of people who are still attending to the standard and some people who are going beyond it. And I think it's just important to get at that. But I'll keep going. One of the things that also people are concerned about who owns these short-term rentals. Now, we do have access to the ownership records through the assessor. In general, of the units that we found, about 3/4 are owned off island. About 26% are owned by Nantucket locals or are registered as being owned in Nantucket. And overall, 60% of units are owned by people. People meaning non-LLCs, not trusts, or not incorporated. Peter. You're muted.
You're muted, Peter. Peter, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I think the 74% off island represents summer people who don't live full time on the island, not necessarily people that don't have anything to do with life on Nantucket.
That's a perfectly fine point. I'm using the address that is in the assessor's records where is that address? Is it on Nantucket or is it not on Nantucket? So that doesn't mean that they aren't present. They might be in this meeting, but that is the address that is on file with the assessor as the owner of this property.
And that's where your tax bill would go, correct?
That is the listed address in the assessor. Yes.
Okay, so most likely that's off island full-time residents. Okay, thank you.
Karen.
I just wanted to make sure, so you counted the LLCs as non-natural persons, even though a lot of those may be tied to natural people or families. I just
Yeah,
want to make sure I heard that correctly.
Yeah, of course. It is a very, very specific, what I wanted to do is understand I don't have access, let me back up. I don't have access to why the LLC is in place or the nature of how that is owned. I just wanted to break out that section because it is a grouping that people talk about as existing. Without some other kinds of inputs, it's very difficult for me to say within LLCs, these people are, they live there, they're just doing it for tax purposes. These people are doing it to, do whatever. So that is the way that, again, I'm using the assessor records and whether it's listed as being owned by an LLC. There's no moral judgment on top of it, I guess.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, but presumably if you were to go into that, to break that down, it would be higher, actually. Owned by natural persons, probably.
Well,
higher than 60%. If a certain percentage of those LLCs are tied to natural people, then the percentage is probably higher.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Julia.
Thanks, Jeffrey. 2 questions. First is, have you looked at residential exemption within the, your Nantucket local category? Okay, so that's the next slide. Okay, so then I have a separate question that's related to what you're currently looking at.
I will get a more specific answer about residential exemptions when we are able to process all our parcel IDs to get all the sales. But I know it's a very, very important topic.
So interesting. So this is actually exactly what I was going to ask about. So this is great. When you're looking at local trusts, so for example, I'm thinking of I'm not going to name a lawyer, but like there are lawyers who are trustees of trusts. And I know by going through the registry, I would end up on a property that I knew who owned the property personally. So I knew they were, let's say, a summer resident, but the trust was registered on the island because the trustee is a lawyer who is local to Nantucket. And so then when I looked into this, I found there were a lot of these, like, a few hundred, maybe. So I don't know. So it sounds like you're already ahead of me. So maybe, maybe I'll
no. So again, I'm using the addresses that are listed on the assessor records. That is especially people, especially people with very good lawyers and very good accountants. There may be a lot of other things going on. I'm not going to deny that there are a lot of different ways to structure these things. And I know it's come up before, the idea that LLC means not local, and that's not true at all.
No.
LLC, again, lots of accountants will tell you to put property as an LLC because that's a better tax deal in some ways. Again, I don't have access to everyone's direct thought. This is just entirely based on the address and the listed owner, and whether that address was on Nantucket or not.
Jeffrey, do you mind if I jump in for a second here?
Yes,
I just want to ask people to, if your question is a clarifying question, that is, there's something here that, right, like, are you breaking this down by this? Do you mean this? Feel free to ask it. If it's a more complicated question, maybe hold it because he may get to your answer. So I just want to make sure that he's able to get through here. So Jim, does yours fit as clarifying question?
I think it's a clarifying question, but I'm not sure, but it's very quick. So Jeffrey, this is very good, but my question is there some way for you in gathering data to determine between the LLCs that are tied to or refer to a natural person versus LLCs that perhaps go to a corporation? That is there some way, the 60%, okay, natural people, but is there some way to include the LLCs, identify and include the LLCs that are tied to natural people and distinguish that group from, quote, business entities that may be corporations or something else? Because I know, at least for me, and I think for a number of us, that's a crucial distinction, that we feel like an LLC that's tied to a natural person is, is probably a good thing, a healthy thing. But as far as a corporation moving in to buy up STRs, maybe not so good. I mean, something we have to talk about. But that's my question. Can that somehow be identified?
I think possibly that may be a different kind of research, because now we're getting into corporate ownership, and sometimes those are not the easiest to track down. Sometimes that's listed, with the state. If it is an LLC that's registered in at the state level, you can track down. I know here in Louisiana, you can see who the officers of that LLC are and all those things. That may still not give you the answer you always want, in terms of how many layers of ownership before you get to a person, and to try to understand what that person is intending, I guess.
So the short answer is it's complicated, is the takeaway.
Well, it can be. It can be. I think one of the things we probably can do, once we get some more of the assessor's records, is to see if there's some continuity, right? So there are plenty of people who, you look at the LLC and the LLC is their name, LLC, to see if there's some continuity of people who have just converted their existing property into an LLC. You can see that even in the sales price, it's $1 or whatever. So there might be able to way to backdoor into that, but otherwise I think it's quite difficult to track down some of those corporate records. I know this has been a big problem in Manhattan, for example, where they lots and lots of people want to hide who is actually owning these things, and that's why they have things in an LLC.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
So are these all clarifying questions about the information he's presented so far?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Yeah, just real quick to clarify, that information is very easily found on the Mass website for
It's like Mass Business or something.
Oh, it's a state website, and it's the
State Secretary.
corporate
Secretary.
division. Yeah, exactly. And it lists, so the problem there, clarifying this, is the problem there is when you research these, I have never researched them and have them come back as an LLC owned by a corporation. It's usually tagged to a couple people's names.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difficult part.
Yeah, and I think it would be difficult to, again, kind of understand what their intentions are and anything. So I do think that there might be able to be ways, like I said, to see if we can tease out some that have just converted, from people's personal homes into an LLC, but the ownership doesn't really change. I think you can really get pretty wild. And also oftentimes those LLCs, they're just registered to a lawyer. They're just registered to an accountant, doing business in the name of the owners. There can be kind of layers on there. So I think you're right that it can be pretty difficult to track that down and get something that's going to tell you something, right? Something that's going to be really meaningful, beyond just some more names. Yeah. Kathy.
Just quickly, I think this is also addressed in the new STR regulations, because I think when you fill out your application, you have to actually put a real person name if there is one. If you are an LLC, they ask you for that. So that is something that will be collected going forward and make it a lot easier, I think, to answer that question.
Yeah, it'll certainly, I think, clarify some elements of that. Again, actual human names, always important. John.
Yeah, I guess I would characterize this more as time consuming to get than complicated. And Stacy, I would say maybe you want to take all of the off-island and local LLCs, divide it up between those of us that are ready to do some research, and let us just go to it, because I do not think it's complicated. It is time consuming. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I think probably closer to what some of the issues that people care about are going to come through looking at the homestead exemptions and maybe the changes in time over those and some of those sales. It is very time consuming. It is very difficult to get data in bulk quickly. So I do want to make sure that whatever data we're collecting, if we're going to ask for people to put in a lot of time, that is going to be relevant and not a ton of work for meager picking. So I think once we get all our parcels really lined up, I think we'll have other avenues that might get us faster to some of these questions. Julia.
Yeah, this is a great question in general, and I think it's a really hard one to answer, because even if you look into the LLCs, Jeffrey, you can, I love your opinion, but the experience that I have, and I'm sure other people have done this, you still can't necessarily tell how the property is necessarily being used, right? So if it's 3 people who own a property and they spend a lot of time there, if it's 3 people and it was just an investment vehicle, they never, planned on setting foot on the island. By seeing who's behind an LLC, you don't always, it's the usage, I think, that paints a better picture, at least for a portion of the picture, I guess.
I think it certainly adds depth, and I think we can start to tease out some more of these narratives. But I did want to make it clear here, because it's come up, I think, a couple times in our meetings and certainly in emails that I get, this idea that LLC by itself equals something, and it's just an ownership vehicle, and that could be by someone who's local, that could be through someone who's local, that could be any number of permutations. But I did want to show, and I think the kind of the flip side of some of the discussion we have about LLCs is that a lot of these, the majority of these, are owned directly to an individual or to a couple, or to a specific family, who don't have some complicated venture or some sort of structure on top of it, that it is a person. Now, I think once we tie that to some of those homestead things, and if we get some usage data, we can really start to segment that and get some other narratives. But I think it's important that people understand this type of graph and understand who some of the players are and how they're structured when we make assumptions about things, or when we try to characterize any type of usage as being positive or negative or in a certain way. So also, fun Thanksgiving fact, in France, this is known not as a pie chart, but as a camembert. So which I learned the hard way. I did want to point this out. So I looked specifically at high occupancy short-term rental. So high occupancy is 10 or more guests, to get a sense of, are these owned more by, I say LLC here, but that includes trusts and incorporations. And yes, it's more likely that a high occupancy short-term rental would be owned by someone off island. So 26% versus 18% in terms of ones that are owned locally. And then just in terms of a kind of broader shape of things. So I broke out all of, again, these LLCs or trusts or incorporated owned short-term rentals. The average number of bedrooms is 4. The average capacity is 8.8. And I'll get back to standard deviation in a second. All short-term rentals across the board, even with some of these 1 bedrooms that are, I think, a little phony, the average number of bedrooms is 2. The capacity is 7.5. And if you look at the deviation, so if you think back to AP stats, the closer that deviation number is to 0, the closer all of the data points line up. So if you had a deviation of 0, that means every number is exactly the same. And what I found really interesting is that the deviation between the number of bedrooms and the deviation between the capacity for LLC owns and all short-term rentals in general are actually pretty similar. So what that tells me is that the shape of the LLC owned short-term rental market and the shape of all short-term rentals in general is actually very similar. They're not all clustered at one end of something. They're not all going for one particular type of property or size of property. It may be shifted slightly larger. 8.8 to 7.5 is one person. It's a slight change. But it was interesting to me to see that and to understand that there isn't some huge clustering of ownership with LLCs at any particular size of property or number of bedrooms. So I wanted to throw that in there because I found that a little surprising, because I think my inclination would to think, oh, well, these are going to be much more the quote unquote corporate owned ones. They're going to tend towards some of these larger properties. And that's not exactly what's going on. So I wanted to include that there because I think it's an interesting tidbit to understand the shape of this industry and the shape of some of the players within it. Does that all make sense? AP stats, it's a long time ago for me. It's a long time ago for everyone. But I think it's an important little detail. So we don't quite have zoning done because we haven't decatenated our parcels. But we do want to get into a little bit about sort of what some of these units are and where they are. 60% of the short-term rental units have single-family use codes, which is the use within zoning. Julia, I'm sure you've looked at this. I'm sure you have thoughts.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to try to clarify this because it looks confusing to me. So single family, all it means is that there's only one dwelling on the property.
Correct.
And
there
multifamily is really, we call it multi-dwelling is what we call it.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird nuances that I had to kind of merge because there are a lot of very similar use codes, right? It's 1010 through 1090. And trying to understand exactly what the difference between two family versus multifamily 2 unit. And you're just, you're sitting there and you're kind of like, okay, these are, I had to pull up the book and try to make sense of them. But I do want to, again, when we get into zoning, I think it'll be a slightly different understanding because that's more geographic. But these are use codes. So you're correct in how you describe them. I did want to point out also 5% have this waterfront modifier, whether that's single family or multifamily. Also, oddly, I found 13 boats as short-term rentals. Not you can bring your boat, not that we have a boat. They were just straight up boats that are trying to be rented as short-term rentals, which I think is too many. It's 13 too many. I love boating, but that's not what we're here to do. I did find this fun. This was a kind of self-described description of the units. There are a lot of listing sites where you choose a kind of descriptor. Number 1 is house. 4% actually describe themselves as bed and breakfast, hotels, or inns. Whether that is true to how they're permitted, that's neither here nor there. And then 8% are cottages, which interesting that some people kind of chose that, and it ties a little bit to these use codes. So if we actually look at the use codes, I broke it down so that there weren't 500 categories here. Majority are in single family MO1, which is single house, single lot. There are 4% that are some of these weird little twists and turns, single family. Then you have a pretty good number that are multifamily, MO1, multifamily, various forms. 8% are condos, which exist in their own use category, and 4% are other or kind of unclear. I think there's one that's just labeled interval, which is not a common use. So this is going to really launch us eventually when we get our parcels together into looking at this in combination with zoning and getting the geographic piece to it to understand where the trends are, single family versus multifamily within zones where both of those are allowed, to understand whether there is some shift within those zones, because I know people are itching to talk about zones very specifically as to whether there needs to be more nuance within them. So One of the last things I want to talk about is about the economics. Now, I don't currently have some of this use data. We have some estimates that we are able to do in-house. This is really looking at listings and what they list. So I talked about how the average rate is a little over $1,000. The mode within there, so the most common one is just $1,000 a night or $7,000 a week. The median is a little lower than that, although I will describe why I think that should actually be higher. I think the median is closer to the mode. Just for fun, if you wanted to rent out one night on every single short-term rental on the island, it would be $4.2 million. And you'll see in the next graph that it is another hockey stick. So the 100 most expensive short-term rentals and the 1,580 least expensive are about the same price in total. And this is the nightly rate chart for 5,000 some odd listings. The reason why I think that median actually should be higher is that there are, again, people trying to game their platforms and listing their units for $1. I don't think they're $1. I know you guys are very accommodating on the island, but I don't think you can stay anywhere on the island for $1. These are also only listings that had a price. So if they didn't have a price, if it was contact the realtor, we couldn't include that because there's no number there. That still didn't, prevent quite a very high kind of hockey stick at the end. There are some obviously very, very, very expensive properties. Yes, Julia.
Just for clarification, is the $1,000 or $1,099, whatever it is that off season, in season?
That is, I have to be very specific about that because that's a very good question. That is as it is listed in the time we've collected it. So that is fairly current. And it's a little tricky because that number, as you guys know, sometimes is really intended for the next summer. Sometimes that's intended for Christmas. Sometimes that's for November 22nd. I don't have a great way to pull that out right now to understand what specific time period that is for. That is just simply the price that is listed on these listings as it is right now.
So it's sort of like the next available time? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And for some of these, that might be May. For some of them, it is tomorrow.
Yeah. It just looks a little low. So I'm thinking, because the average, I think in August, let's say on AirDNAs, and anyone can go on there, is like, let's say 1,500 or 1,400. It's not that I don't think it makes a huge difference. It's just a little low, that's all.
Yeah, no, I think there's probably some seasonality to it. And one of the things that we're able to do is to capture this over time. So I will kind of keep updating this in order to capture some of that seasonality. I know it's a little complicated because you do have people who are booking quite a ways in advance. And sometimes some of those properties are actually listed all the way in advance for the high season. So, again, I think it's more, if anything, it's almost more about the shape of the graph necessarily to understand that it's not a bell curve. It's not anything, but you do have kind of a ramp up and then a very high end. Yes, Peter.
One of the distortions, and I don't know where we see it yet, in our numbers against anywhere else that I can think of, is our lack of hotel rooms.
Mm-hmm.
We only have, 500 hotel rooms on this island, somewhere around there. And if you have a wedding, for example, on a Saturday in September, we can have 30 weddings in one Saturday on this island. So it would be distorted. You've got 500 rooms that are totally full before you go to the houses. And then the houses could be rented as one room because they have no choice.
Right.
So it's kind of a different kind of dynamic than you normally see.
Yeah, we definitely need another data point in order to get at, I think, these usage questions, right? And we don't quite have that data point yet. This is more about just what people are putting out there as their nightly rate. And that shifts over time. That's one of the reasons why this market is very difficult to say this is the number, right? Because 2 months from now, it's a totally different number. 2 weeks from now, it's a totally different number. So, to be very upfront, this is what is listed as the nightly rate this instant, or whenever we collected it within the last few weeks. And that may, again, because of the different properties, that may refer to the next booking, and that could be tomorrow, or that could be in May. And we can start to look at, we do capture what the next available calendar date is on places that do have calendars. So we can try to use that to maybe get at seasonal shifts or to separate out some of the properties that are, that rent throughout the fall and through the winter even, from some of the ones that are focused entirely on spring, summer, and early fall. So I can get at that a little bit. The usage information that may or may come in some form from the realtors, I think would really just add the depth, because you get, I think, at the flow of things more than just the nightly rate. That's not going to tell you that. Kathy.
So there's the data mining is going to run into so many hiccups. I think the process to do that, because of the particular nature of Nantucket. If you on these platforms, very often if you don't put a rate in, it'll quote the lowest rate for the year. So that's the one you're going to see, and so forth and so on. Now, what I might suggest here is, and I don't know if everyone agrees with this, but the real problem, the real thing that people complain about, one of our policy objectives has to do with overcrowding, so forth and so on. And people might agree that June and July, or July and August, are the problem. Maybe they agree, maybe they don't agree. So maybe that's the data we should be looking at. I don't know that anybody really cares how much an STR costs in January, for example.
Right.
It's irrelevant. So
yeah.
Is there a way to capture that data and we focus on that versus getting so much of an open chance of getting erroneous information when you look at the graphs and see there's one bedrooms everywhere, and it's hard to make a point that your data is trustworthy when you have these little hiccups and stuff in it all the time.
Yeah, and I think I take your point. I think one of the things that we can do is, again, how do we tie some of this information to some other factor that is relevant, right? And so, in the same way that I'll mention this in just a moment, looking at size or zoning or just some other factor in order to give this some more depth. Right now, it doesn't have a lot of depth, which means it doesn't really, it only takes you so far, let's say. And what we can do, and we are doing, is collecting this data over time, and being able to look at it over time. And if there is other data out there that captures more nuance, especially around the high season, we will fold that in to make sure that we are looking at this across multiple factors at the same time. Yeah. Thomas.
Jeffrey, you're at the end here.
Yes.
Kind of general question. Okay. Good evening.
Just about to be, yes.
Okay, quick question. On the first slide, you had the number, which is the universe, or big N as they call it in stats. Would you please briefly comment on your kind of confidence about that number?
Sure. So actually, one I wrap up here, and then I'll answer that. Yeah. So I did want to break down what some of the nightly rates are, just to, again, that within the realm of all the listings, the preponderance is $1,000 or near it. I know it says under 500, that there are very, very few that are actually much lower than 500 that I have any confidence in, besides the couple that are, $1, I think, placeholders. Another, I think, very important part is to look at minimum night stays. There are really 3 categories that matter. In this case, it's 1, 3, and 7. I found it interesting that basically 50%, 48% already have seven night minimums. And I know this has come up quite a bit, people talking about what a minimum stay is. there are some places that do 3. It appears that already people are doing 7. David.
Jeffrey, have you divided this up into timeframes? Because I suspect that if you ran this same thing for July and August, that the 7-day would be a much larger percentage, and on the corner seasons, it would fall away.
Well, this is the data that we have for the end of fall, let's say, and this is what people are listing as their minimum stay. Currently as of the time we've collected this data, so that is October and November for the most part. There is certainly shifts in this over time, and there are shifts in this within populations of types of short-term rentals. So, I don't think this is to give you a sense that already a lot of places are already at that 7-day in the fall times. That obviously also depends a little bit on some of the types of properties that we're looking at, and certainly on the platform. So these are listings. You may actually have some people who are doing different length stays on different platforms. And this would be in here as well.
Perfect. Thank you. So these are again listings.
These are listings.
Units.
This is listings. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Kathy.
I just went, sort of repeating what David says, unless we get this for the summer, it doesn't tell us what we need to know, I think. So I would encourage you to be able to go get that data for the high season, which is the most important part. I know that there are people who have very high minimums in the summertime, and then in the off season, like now, their minimums are much lower.
Sure.
And so to do it in this time of year is not really helpful, and it might show you that you don't, or people might interpret it that you don't know what you're doing with your data analysis, and we wouldn't want that to be the case.
Sure. So in terms of some next steps, we are just about through sorting out all our parcel IDs, and that would tie us to issues about ownership tenure. What sort of trends do we see in terms of how long people have or LLCs or trusts or whatever have owned certain short-term rentals? Can we look at things like off-island owners by zone or by size or by price? We can get that again through some of these property transfer records. We can even look at the sales price and start to look at this question that I think has come up quite a bit, which is there a price premium for certain types of units, whether that is for something that is going to be a short-term rental exclusively versus something that people are going to get a homestead exemption for, or certain types of properties, certain zones of properties, those sorts of things. And then also, what is the count per zone? So what is the geographic breakdown by zoning type in order to understand the geography of these, and whether, again, you can use zoning as a particular tool to shape the market. Usage information, I feel like John probably has some more insight on this as well, which is any sort of usage information will just only add depth to the other data that we have. How do we use that to identify submarkets? So to try to separate out the types of users, and I know there are a lot of different use cases, but can we put them together into sort of buckets that will help us understand what sort of trends are going on? And then as I think we've all talked about, what are some of the trends post-pandemic or through the pandemic, to try to understand, in a lot of places we've worked, the trends that were happening before the pandemic got interrupted but have started back up. Other places that have been totally disrupted and have gone in a very different direction. That any sort of historical data will really be useful in terms of understanding what some of those trajectories are and the nuances of them. So that's the next step for us, and the parcel ID stuff will be sorted out, I think, next week, which will really give us access to a lot of that information. I know it's information that people have gathered in the past, but we'll be able to relate it directly to listings and to units as we have in our system. Yeah. David, do you have a new question, or is that your previous one?
Sorry, old hand.
That's all right. John.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's very useful. Stacy, I'd like to make a recommendation that before Jeffrey goes much further, that you and this group figure out what it is we really want to know. And let's make sure we get focused on what we really want to know more than what is interesting. So I'll just leave it at that. But I think, in fairness to Jeffrey, we and all of us, we need to be clear on what information do we need to take our mission forward. Thank you.
Julia.
Thanks, Jeffrey. This is great, and I totally agree with John. I think that, because there are layers behind some of these questions, it would make sense to trim down what the group wants to see, given the amount of time you have to invest in it. And I guess my question was related to the usage. What do you think you'll be able to show this group in terms of usage on the, for the STRs? And when I think usage, I think like number of days that something might be rented during a year, or so. That's what I go to, but maybe you're thinking something different.
Nope. That that's the type of information that we are discussing with the realtors group. So that is some of the data that they think they have or have some understanding of. That part of the difficulty is it's going to be, I was going to say it's explicit. Zoning is not that explicit. It's personal. It's very personal information. It is about people's addresses and people's money. And so there is going to be, I think, a discussion with them about data protections and how specific can we get with some of that data. I haven't seen any of it. If we are able to get it in some form, even if that's aggregated to a geography or however it is, we can use that to just again add depth to some of this other information. Maybe it's not out there, maybe it's out there in forms that are not that easily gathered, maybe it's who knows. But that's where that usage information, that's probably not going to come from our system. That's going to be other types of data that people may have.
So so just to clarify, if you did not have access to the NARAB data or some form of NARAB data, local realtor listings, you would not be able to provide information on usage for the listings that are listed on platforms.
We would be very limited in what we would be able to put out with any sort of confidence. We have ways of doing some estimations. A lot of those are more dependent on the traditional short-term rental platforms like Airbnb and VRBO, which again will only get, even if we do those estimates, that's only going to, I think, get 50% of the market, as we've talked about. So we can backdoor our way into some understanding of it, but it's not going to be the same as getting a specific piece of data. We don't have that native to our system. If other people have that, we would gladly use it to the degree we can use it. But that's not going to originate within the Granicus system. Correct. David.
Hi, yeah, I think I just want to expand on what John said. And I think in all fairness to you, Jeffrey, not to make you dig places you don't need to dig. And for the expediency of this, I think that we should really, and I don't know how Stacy wants to do it, because I could suggest important data points. I'm sure other members could, that we get a list of the data points that are specific to our decision-making needs. And we primarily focus on those, because I just think it will make the process easier while gathering, easier while digesting, and make it easier for us to draw assumptions from.
Mhm.
Yeah, and just to jump in on that, right, this has been a bit of an iterative process in collecting, in asking Jeffrey what kind of data we want, and then Jeffrey trying to share with us what kind of data he has, right? And now trying to find, okay, where is the intersection of decision relevant data that this group really needs, that Jeffrey can collect and share? Because there's all kinds of data people are saying they would like that we're just not going to get. And there's other data, right, that people are saying they want that actually aren't really going to influence the decision in any meaningful way. So I think we do have to get a finer point here on what data people really think is decision critical, that is also achievable in a reasonable period of time.
Yeah, I did want to not forget Thomas's question,
Yeah.
which is that number is made up of taking listings from the platforms that we usually look at, which is largely Airbnb, VRBO, Expedia, Group, Flipkey, all of those, and figuring out the addresses tied to those listings, then deduplicating them, right? And then on top of that, now we have scanned, I think 5 or 6 of the largest local real estate platforms. I'll call them platforms, which in some ways is a lot easier because they have the addresses already on the listings. Again, deduplicating them to get a number of units. Now, this market, as we know, is very dynamic. So it is our our best understanding of the numbers as of the data collection period, which has been roughly the last 6 weeks. If there are things that come and go before the time we start collecting data, we won't have it. If we will collect things that will appear as they appear. And we also do keep track of, say, when listings are added, when they are taken away, when were they last updated. So we often see listings that are put up that the calendar never changes, they don't get booked, they don't have any new reviews, any of those things. So we have some nuance even within that number to say how many units or how many listings, let's say, showed any kind of activity over the last 6 months or last year or last, ever. But that is our best understanding of the number of units and listings that we have collected over this last 6 weeks. I think we have a confidence interval somewhere that I can share with you if you want to get into that. But that is our process, and that is how we arrived at those numbers. Jim.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I want to ask about one particular bit of possible information, whether it's possible to gather or get, or whether it would violate privacy even to try to do it. And that question is it possible to find information about the owner of a property who is doing STRs and how long they occupy that property during a year, or perhaps even how long they live on the island? I don't know if it matters to most of us. It might matter to some of us, but it's just a piece of information. I'm wondering if it's even possible to get, either legally or logistically.
Well, it's not easy. The closest I think we can come would be through some sort of their homestead tax relief, and whether they are claiming that. Beyond that, it gets real tricky because I'm not sure how that would be logged, right, or where or who would log it. The best you can do is whether someone is claiming that that homestead. I call it a homestead exemption. I think you have a slightly different term.
That's for year-round residents. Is that right?
I believe it has some sort of string
Yeah.
attached to it
Yeah,
like that. Yes.
because
You're around.
of course I'm interested in that, but I'm also curious. I do feel myself, I feel there's a big difference between a seasonal resident or a summer resident, whatever term one uses, a part-time resident, between a seasonal resident, let's say, and between someone who lives off island and merely has a commercial interest and never even comes to the island. I mean, that's an emotional thing. Obviously, I think the people that live here, whether 12 months or for 3 months or 2 months, have an emotional investment in keeping the neighborhood quality of life really good in different definitions, certainly. But it may not be possible to distinguish between seasonal residents and commercial, so what I call commercial interests, but I'm just curious if there's some way to try to ferret that out. And
I think, you know, directly, I don't think anyone's keeping tabs on those days. The best you could probably do is look for changes over time, which would be to look at property that is sold. Did it stay registered on Nantucket, or did it get sold from someone who was registered on Nantucket to someone off island? Even that, I still don't think gets at, again, some of these seasonal residents, because unless they have sort of made a claim to either to live on the island, whether that's even through just how the property is registered or through a homestead tax relief, I'm not sure how we would totally get at it. I just don't know what the source of that data would be specifically. We can kind of backdoor our way into broader changes, but that specific one I think would be really difficult to capture. Yeah, Kathy.
Just quickly, and this goes back to your slide here. So good conversation going on. And I think I like Jim Sulzer's question is a really difficult one to answer. And I think it means a lot to not only the people who live on Nantucket year round, but those of us who aren't fortunate to be able to do that right now. Anyway, but my question is back to your slide there. When you're talking about allocating things to zoning, one of the things that I wondered if you can do is to then tie zoning to neighborhoods, because one of the things that we are having our policy objectives is to maintain neighborhoods and so forth. And our zones are not neighborhoods. They're just pieces of things all over the map. If you look at them.
Oh, I mean, this is a very,
how do you
very,
do that?
Well, once we
you
get
do that
into
by address, you can say, oh, these addresses are in this neighborhood. Can you sort the data that way is my question.
Yeah, so once we tie it specific to the parcels in GIS, we can geographically slice and dice things however we want. It's a really, really, really powerful tool to say, tell me all about the ones in this area. And you just draw a rectangle or a pentagram or whatever you're trying to do. You can really separate things out. We would need to determine what those boundaries would be. I think this is always a big topic of what is the neighborhood. And I think if you ask people to draw neighborhoods, they'll give you 10 different answers. But we've certainly done that in many places where if you have set geographies or types of geographies, even distances, we're able to give you insight onto the short-term rentals in those specific neighborhoods. Or we've done things where it's what's happening within 1,500 feet of this. We could do what's happening within 1,000 feet of the Stop and Shop. I mean, we could slice it and dice it however we want. We would just need to know what those boundaries would be. And that will cut across all sorts of zoning, because like you said, zoning is, I mean, it's like my toddler drew it. It's all over the place. John.
Yeah, Stacy, I would like to talk for a couple of minutes about NARAB. So it's either right now or before we leave this section. So is this okay to do it now?
I think so. Now seems like a good time.
So about a week ago, I got a really nice and good call from Penny Day, the president of the Nantucket Association of Real Estate Brokers. And Penny was very direct and said, look, we'd like to talk to you and the group about how we can help. And I can say since then, I met with Penny in person one time. We had a couple of calls since then. And, NARAB will definitely help us get this decision critical data that we keep talking about. They are ready to work with 10 to 12 of their biggest brokerages to help us get whatever it is we need, not all the peripheral stuff, but whatever it is we decide we want. And if we can be clear about it, they will help us. You might ask, well, what is what's their motivation? Their motivation is very clear. They want to make sure that we and our community have complete and accurate information around this subject. And there is a lot of anecdotal stuff flying around, and it would be good to replace that, and that they would help us. They have a very specific suggestion, which I think is a very good one. They would like for us to nominate one or two of our work group members as facilitators to work with them, and where it crosses over with Granicus, to really kickstart our data gathering and analysis goals. And their suggestion, not mine, that they think the best way to do this is if we could get a couple of our members to work directly with them, work directly with Granicus, and really get this thing moving. I would like to be one of those facilitators. I would suggest that the second one probably could be David Iverson. He has a lot of knowledge around all of this. But whether it's me and David or two other people, I really think we need to meet NARAB, at the crossroads and provide to them, a direct way to provide data to us and not have to wait for 2 weekly meetings. Let's really have a couple of people work with them, because we cannot, when we talk about timelines, if we don't get the data from NARAB to put side by side with what Jeffrey is going to do when we give him more direction, if we don't do that, we're just another group of 10 people with personal opinions. And you know what? Why us and why not 10 other people off the street? So, Stacey, that's the request. I would ask the group if we could really decide this tonight, or if not, in the next few days, do we want to work with NARAB directly or not? And if we do, who are the one or two people to work with them? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, just to speak to that for a moment. Knowing how contentious all of this is, I feel like having Jeffrey be our primary data expert and have Jeffrey be the one working with NARAB with direction and input from the group as a whole, feels to me like it's going to be more credible than people meeting privately with people from this group meeting privately in a non-public meeting with NARAB talking about the data that other people are not privy to those conversations. So I feel like it's fine to do that as a subgroup meeting that is noticed, and whoever from the group wants to attend can do so, or that the group really gives your direction to Jeffrey, and Jeffrey is the go-between on the data. So that's
okay, but let me just respond Peter. I disagree. I think, getting this data requires work between our 2 weekly meetings. And if it's not me, I would like to be a part of that, but if that's not who the group would like, but I do think, Stacy, we need to move this along, and we're not going to move it along. We've been at this 3 months almost, and 2 months. And I would say, let's have someone or 2 people from this group work with Jeffrey and with NARAB to move this along. I'm not suggesting anybody does anything privately. This is, let's keep bringing it back to the group. Let's bring it to the 2-week meetings, but it needs work, Stacy. It needs work between the meetings. And honestly, I'll just say, I do not think that is happening at the speed it needs to happen.
Peter.
I agree with John. If we just go through what we just went through with the data that was put together and the lack of understanding, in terms of the numbers that were given to us, and not understanding Nantucket and how it works and what the numbers mean. If you don't have a person directly from this group, alternate the people, doesn't really matter, but somebody who's there to coordinate with NARAB in terms of trying to bring us in the right direction of the problems that Nantucket has that are so different than anybody else's. I understand that when we're looking at numbers, it's easy to look at numbers the same everywhere. You can't do that here. Just one other thing I wanted to throw out. You can't look at the people that get the tax break and use that for any sort of information, because the town is investigating it right now. There's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of people that are claiming they live here year round that don't. So that's not a valid place to look right now.
Julia.
It seems to me like if NARAB is willing to present information, that sounds valuable. But it also seems like it would be a pretty short list of things that really they could provide. Like, and if there's a way that they're willing to provide it, meaning hiding the street number or whatever the case may be, that would, I'm not sure what they'd have to hide. And it seems like Jeffrey is like, in a way, maybe the perfect person, because he could be the data, he can have a data agreement with these folks, as a corporation that's being hired by the town. I don't know. But yeah, maybe, and the other way maybe is that, one of the NARAB, I don't know if it's too late to wait for the early December meeting for them to show up there and sort of, decide what's available and what they can do then. Have them show up at that meeting. I'm not sure.
David.
I get what you're saying, Stacy. I completely understand your point. I support John's point, but I don't want it to be more complex. Before we go any farther with data, though, I think we as a group need to decide on the data points we need before we go there. But I think that it's important that we have an active, and I'm going to say liaison between the group and Granicus. I prefer being a group member, but I understand your point. But most importantly, we need to all agree on the data points that we find important, so people aren't doing work they don't need to do, and it's just a faster process.
Yeah. And I mean, I am really curious how, so we started our first meeting asking people what data they needed. We collected all of that information. We shared that with Jeffrey. Then we had a data call sub meeting. Everybody shared with Jeffrey the information data that they thought they needed. So people have all individually sent Jeffrey all of their ideas of what data they needed. I think we can try to list hear what we think we need. Right? People want to know how many STRs there are, particularly July and August. People want to know where they are, right? You want to know how big they are. You want to know the growth of STRs over time. That one's hard to, not sure, Jeffrey, if that's, data you have. Maybe it's something NAREB has, right? Which is sort of the growth of the rental market.
We have
over time.
snapshots over the last 4 or 5 years. The problem with them, and the reason why you guys haven't seen them, is were not taken at consistent times. So you have some in March, and then some in July, and then some in September for 1 year, and in other years you have different months, and that's that's not going to work for you guys in terms of presenting a meaningful line that people can follow along with. So I haven't bothered to show that with you. I would suspect the realtor group probably have ways to fill in those gaps around their activity. Yeah.
You have, questions about the things that you've already showed, Jeffrey, that you're working on, right? The relationship between home sales and STR listings, right? Are like how, over the last 5 years of all the homes sold and purchased, how many what percentage are used for STRs, right? That kind of thing. You can show where they are on the map. What else do people feel like you really need to know for us to be able to move forward? Right, people have already said, we'd like to know how many of the STRs are connected to people who love and care about the island and spend time in it. And we've heard there's no way to get you that information, right? That's not gonna be possible.
Stacey, are you lobbing that question out there, or I see hands
I
up?
am. I'm lobbing a question out there.
Because I would say usage was the one that would be, really helpful, because to your point, we can't figure out, we don't know how long this person stays on the island versus that person. Residential exemption, all due respect, Peter, it's the best information we have. There may certainly be some people who've held on to them, but they had to go through a process. You have to show your tax return. It's a pretty rigorous process. So I don't know why we wouldn't use that as at least a guide.
So Stacey, are we dispensing with the hands up
Sorry.
system?
Sorry,
Yeah,
that was.
so yeah. John.
Yeah, look, what you just said, the last 2 or 3 minutes is why I think we need to work directly with NAREB and Jeffrey and keep them on the right track between meetings, because it's not working to have 14-day intervals and then talk about it again. And I really don't understand why we would not take advantage of a genuine offer from our local real estate people to provide us what information we want and to work with us to get it in a form that we want. And I just don't understand why you have hesitation in letting us do that. And I guess I would like to take a poll of the group what do you think about having a couple of people or one person from this group be the coordinator with NAREB to work on their part of this with Jeffrey and bringing it together with Jeffrey, but to have us in the mix of these discussions. So I guess my request is that we take a vote, see whether we want to do this or not.
Yeah. All right. Kathy.
So just quickly, one of the things that I sent in to you guys was, I think, a list of all the policy objectives that are listed right now. The data that would be needed to address those, whether to prove or disprove them or show the effect, and then where the possible sources are for that data. That might be a starting point. So just throwing that out there. And I support also the what John has said in getting a participation, because I think what's happening here is there's a lot of information that's very interesting to Jeffrey, but it's not necessarily relevant to what we need. And I think that somebody from this, or some people from this group, could help, guide that discussion so that you're not having Jeffrey mine or use or analyze a lot of data that doesn't really relate to what we need to make our decisions on. Thank you.
David.
Hi, thank you. A couple things. I want to suggest a list of data, but I also wanted through you to ask Julia if she could expand on what she means by use, just so that if it's something viable that I added into that list.
Number of days that a property
Okay.
would be booked.
Perfect. Okay. So this is the list I kind of came up with, and it's really short, but basically we need to know how many, where they're located, how many rental days per unit, and the form of ownership. And if possible, we could get from NARAB a 5-year look at that to give us the trends. I think that would be enough to help us make our decision, unless Julia or anyone else has anything they'd like to add into that.
I will mention that in my conversation with Penny and another gentleman whose name I has escaped me.
Edward Sanford, probably.
Okay, that probably Edward. That makes sense. My asks were pretty similar to that. I wanted to know, certainly addresses, because addresses we can tie to parcels, and parcels you can tie to ownership. I wanted to know not just really days, but specifically income and prices. Again, to get at a couple things. One would be the comparison to long-term housing in various forms. Two, to understand the price premium on short-term rentals in terms of location, size, and underlying zoning. And to just, like I said, deepen the information we have and deepen the understanding of that over time. So those were my asks to her when I talked to her 10 days ago, something like that. That is not information, as I've said, that Granicus can easily collect, because that information is not usually public, right? That is private information. And just to be able to get that type of understanding of the ways that these properties are used, and I emphasize this with Penny as well, that everyone pulls up that map of short-term rentals and you see a million dots. There's a lot of nuance in there in terms of their impacts based on how often people stay in them. And so if they have information on that, if it needs to be aggregated by in some form, whether that's geographically or whatever it needs to be, then we'll go from there. I will say, and sort of to Stacy's point, there are some real issues about having that data just floating around. We have the forms already made in terms of how we do privacy protections on that data and any data that is given to us. So we certainly are in the position at Granicus to protect what might be very sensitive data or trade secrets or financial information so that they are not disseminated, which I know would be an unnecessary stressor for a lot of people. So just want to say that we're prepared to have that into whatever agreement we need to make with them to have those data protections.
Can I ask Jeffrey to clarify something real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you say you're trying to figure out the relationship with long-term rentals, can you just kind of explain your method there, or what you think is going to help you figure that out?
Well, it's sometimes you start in and you go, oh no, this isn't relevant at all. Certainly a lot of places, not a Nantucket type of place, would look at how many days do you need to rent to equal a long-term renter. That's not going to
Yeah.
be relevant for you guys. I mean, just the numbers are so different. But really, so then you're looking at more the price premium that people are paying to buy property in order to do different forms of short-term renting, you know, and whether there would be ways to incentivize or disincentivize different kinds of stays or ownerships within the short-term rental market, so that it is, you know, to give an example, shifted more towards people who live there full time, or shifted in ways more towards people who are there half the year or whatever it is, to just try to get some understanding of, if you have people who are buying property that are investing, you know, intending for this to be a real moneymaker, how do you see that in the marketplace and see that through the sales records compared to their income, right? Because you would have income information. That's really the best we could do. Again, long-term renting, I think, as many of you would know, is kind of out the window with a lot of these types of properties.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on, but I'm not. I just wanted to kind of understand your reasoning there. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, sometimes you put that in a spreadsheet and you run one number and you go, this ain't it, right? This is not going to get you where you need to go, or the numbers just don't tell you anything that points you in a direction. And you go, well, this is just a number. So
I think there's real world math, and then there's Nantucket real estate math. They may be different.
That's fair.
Thank you.
Karen.
I have kind of two things. One is, I am curious to know what kinds of data NAREB has and what they want us to understand. So we can see if it's stuff that we would be interested in learning more about. So I'd be curious if we can maybe hear from them in some way. I'm fine with it being with some part of us meeting with them and presenting back to the group in some way. But I'm also fine with, if there's another way for them to come speak with us in some way, that would be fine too. The other thing is, I keep going back to, what's the goal of this data? A lot of these things that we again saw today was interesting, but how does it relate back to the goals? So I'm really interested in Kathy's document and kind of understanding more about what they've put together to, how is all this going to be tied to the goals? So for example, if we reduce short-term rentals in this way, what kinds of effects does it have? Those are the kinds of data that I'm most interested in, to see, like, if we put in various interventions, does it help? Those kinds of things. And I know we're not probably at that point yet, but those are some of my thoughts right now.
Yeah, and I'm curious, when people say length of stay and number of days, like I would imagine that varies. Are we assuming at full occupancy? And is it always full occupancy? It is always full occupancy. David?
I think what we're asking for is how many days an individual property rented.
For each property, how many days?
Yes. Yeah.
Over July and August, or the whole year?
Whole year.
Whole year. I mean, I think be helpful. I mean, hopefully.
And tell me, so let's say how many days any given property has rented. What information does that give you that helps us answer our
If they only rented for 2 weeks, they should be removed from the list.
right?
So that's one thing.
Okay.
And I think it just helps us understand the intensity of use at that property.
Yeah.
You agree, folks?
Yes.
And so, because I think
And
intensity.
what does that, but then what would that tell you? How would that influence? Like, I'm just a little worried about, I know there's a lot of push for data, and I know data is important. And I do really want to make sure we are understanding the decision relevance of all of this data, because I do also want to say that once we get this data, and even if we all agree on the data, you're not going to agree on what the data means or implies for what the policies should be.
Well, I mean, listen, I've stated it a lot of times. We should make no regulation that isn't based on
No.
data that supports the problem we're trying to solve, right? So I think that if we look at the data and, I don't think that capping by the amount of days rented is off the table. So if we see that there's a high intensity of use in a certain area, that we may be able to massage that into a more workable situation. I just we don't want to remove our ability to regulate it in lots of different ways. And I think that the data will support whether that needs to be done or not.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. John?
Look, all this discussion is great. And this is what I think, if we have someone from our group working directly with NARAB, working directly with.
John, I feel like you keep repeating the same point, and
Okay,
I
but
think the
all
point
I'm
has been
asking,
made.
Stacy, is are you going to ask the group whether we want to proceed with that or not? Because if you're just
I am
going to
happy
say,
to hold, I am happy to invite, if NARAB is open to having an open meeting with Jeffrey and members of this group, or if every member of this group feels like there's one or two people that you want to appoint to have private meetings with NARAB and Jeffrey, and NARAB is fine with that. I'm potentially open to that if that's really what everybody thinks.
yeah, but you're characterizing them as private meetings. That's not it at all. It's whoever that person or persons are, that they work with every member of this group to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what we want to get. And as we get information, we work with every member of this group. It's just, Stacey,
John,
to get
John, that is
somewhat.
not consistent with public meeting.
Okay, can you
open
remember
meeting
your
law.
own rules about letting people speak? I haven't quite finished. So, I just feel like this is a way to work with the local group, brokerage groups that have the information. We can be as targeted as we want to be. And it's not, please don't characterize this as private meetings. It's not. That is the farthest thing from their mind and ours. But guys, I just want to hear, if everybody thinks this is a bad idea, it's a bad idea. So, but I think we should ask people to just focus on, do we want to do this or not? So we can be clear back to NARAB.
All right, so I want to be really clear about what the open meeting law rules are. While it is a member of this group, or maybe two members of this group, could go and have a conversation with NARAB, they cannot collect information from other members of the group, one-on-one or as a whole, and relate those to NARAB and then do anything else with them, right? That is serial communication, and it is not allowed by open meeting law. So I, as the facilitator, can collect a bunch of data from you all, right, as I did in a survey, and I can present that data in a public meeting. I cannot present that public data, the data that you all gave me one-on-one, I cannot present it to you all and ask for further feedback outside of a public meeting, right? That is against open meeting law. So there are real limitations for coordinating the input of the group outside of public meetings. So I just want to make sure we're really clear that any meeting that were to take place between members of this group and NARAB that were about the business of this group cannot draw on any individual conversations with any other members of this group. That is not consistent with open meeting law. So someone who, if anyone wants to correct me on that, feel free. But that is my understanding of open meeting law. And the challenge, John, that is a challenge, right? When you're in a process like this, it is not necessarily the most quick and efficient way to do business, right? And we are constrained by the reality of open meeting law.
Okay, Stacy, look, NARAB want to help us. Why don't you perhaps take this over and figure out with them the best way to do that?
Yeah. So what I would really like to do is to make sure that I can get a short list of what are the questions people have that they want answers to, right? So let me just post in the chat right now what I've heard so far. And then, I want to sort of give over our time here to just making sure we're clear, right? I think we should use this time right now rather than sharing back the data we heard in the polls, for example, which, as you've all said, interesting, but not that helpful if we don't know what the data is. So let's take the next hour and let's make sure we understand what is the data that people want. And are we asking all the right questions? And then, right, so here, what we heard so far, we have how many STRs are there? What are their sizes, right? Where are they and how are they distributed? And what's the intensity of use for each, right? And then, of course, we also have ownership, which Jeffrey's been collecting to the extent that we can understand it, right? What else? Jim.
Thank you. Okay, so two things. One, I think in addition to how many days each is rented, we should have the data of how many leases are there per year with each piece with each STR. And the reason for that is someone might rent for 90 days, but it's 3 28-day rentals or whatever. And that, to me, would probably be less intense use than someone that rents out for 3 days at a time and has, whatever that would be, 18 of them or whatever that would be. So number of leases per year, I think, is an important piece of data to gather. And the ownership, and I know, Stacy, we're making fun of, people that love Nantucket, et cetera, et cetera. I get that. And it sounds silly from that point of view. But if we can really, looking at it from the other point of view, the ownership of, if we can somehow get closer to commercial ownership, I know that may not be possible, but I think that's an important piece of data if there's some way to tease that out. And I know that's different from LLCs. I know that's different from seasonal, residents, all that. But if there's some way we can somehow get some sort of data on so-called commercial ownership through tax records, through signing up for the local, ability to rent, any of that. Those are the two things I suggest.
Jim, I'm going to give you, not that you need homework over Thanksgiving, but I think it's, I think it's an important thing, when we talk about, say, a commercial rental, and this can lead into, I think, some of the data that we can collect to the degree we can collect it, which is to define it and really say, in your heart, what does that mean to be commercial? If they're renting out 90 days of the year and they're making $400,000 or something, but also they live there the rest of the time, is that a commercial? I mean, this is where.
Right. And I would say, no, that's not if they live there the rest of the time. But
right. So I think that's an important, way to start to dig into, and it does lead into, and I do this all the time, just it starts to dig into, okay, what is the type of use and how do we define it? Then how do we show any of this to the degree we can? So,
and Jeffrey, those are great points, and I really appreciate it. I will work on that, but I will also just really quickly allude back to the last meeting when I quoted, and it was in the law firm's report, but the Palm Springs, California, defines commercial use as any STR that is not owned by a natural person or by an LLC that refers or is tied to natural people. And I realize there's ways to, to mess with that and obfuscate that. But, and the ruling we got from the law firm is yes, Nantucket probably could go with that definition. It would need to be passed by a number of people. But so that's the basic issue I'm talking about. And but your points are very well made, and I totally agree with you. I'm not talking about natural people living on the island some of the time and making lots of money from it. That may be commercial, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a firm that is not tied to natural people, but is a corporation.
No, I think that's excellent. And I think you know, through that definition, you see immediately, okay, this is the type of data we would need to describe those people. And
that's exactly what I'm looking for. And I greatly appreciate your questions.
Yeah, and I bring this up because in many places there are these terms that are, I guess, slippery, right? You know, and I think it's come up again, you know, ideas about neighborhood character. Well, that can be any number of different things. That could be the people, that could be the look, that could be the historic nature. I mean, it can be a lot of different things. So just, you know, people always start to unpack those things, and it does and direct you towards either other examples from other communities, which I think is really great, or just the specifics would be able to pluck off in terms of data.
Right. Thank you very much for that.
Kathy.
And this is a larger picture, and I don't know if people would agree to this, but if we're talking again about the overcrowding of the island in the summertime, we definitely need to know information delineated by season, but we really have no feel for this population burst that happens in July and August. Who is in that? How many are day trippers? How many are people who are seasonal owners that are spending time in their homes? How many people are renting for 31 days or more? How many people, I mean, there's different categories of people who are on the island causing the overcrowding. And if let's say we find that no matter what we do, we're only going to impact 10% of that or something else, you know, I think that's what we need to know is what is the overall population that spurts. And then we need to also look at the fact that the population, the year-round population of Nantucket has grown by 40% over the past, I don't know, not even a decade, I guess. So that's also a part of the problem because the year-rounders are there in the summertime too. So I think that whole looking at the analysis, it's way beyond our scope, but I mean, we need to see the whole big picture so we can see what part we play in it.
Right, but so Kathy, you're not though suggesting somehow of trying to collect data of all the people who come to the island and whether they're in STRs, because that doesn't seem like a doable.
All I'm saying is without a full picture, whatever we choose to do, we'll have no idea of the impact because we don't know what the rest of the picture looks like. That's part of the problem is that those objectives are so global and so island wide and have nothing, they may have everything to do with STRs, they may have nothing to do with STRs. And until we see the other components of the population growth in the summer, we won't understand how to regulate it.
Right. So this is the challenge we will run into, right? There will come a point at which no matter if this is the data we're looking for, Jeffrey, if this is the data, do you think it is doable to get? What here is not doable? And then the question to people is, if this is what we have, is this going to be, can we move forward with trying to put a policy together, right? Or are we going to be hamstrung by the need for more data that we either don't have or can't get, right? Because as important as David said, as having data is never going to be the answer to your question. Policy questions are truly based, you don't just look at the data and then you have your answer, right?
Right,
People
but if we find out that STR impacts are 50% of the overcrowding, we would have a different policy than if we discover it's 10%.
But there is no way to know the answer to that question, right? Is there a way to know the answer to that question? What
Maybe not, but
percentage
then
of the
but
people on the island are using STRs?
our framework says we need to base it on data. How can we make a policy decision if we don't have it? I think that this is information that's probably estimable or some way to get just an overall, I think it probably is available.
I mean, I think that, you know, to the degree that it's answerable, you could combine a bunch of different factors. If you had usage numbers by days or by months, you could estimate the number of people who are staying at any given time. You wouldn't have very good numbers on people who are not staying in short-term rentals, who are staying in homes that they own or homes their friends own. You know, you could maybe try to pull some numbers from the ferry or from the airport. But the difficulty with that is even if we got those numbers, you know, just in the way that I was saying before about our terms, what is overcrowded, right? How do we determine that it is too much, or what the number is? I don't have a good answer for that.
No, but I mean, you can say, let's say we have the data platform that estimates how many people are here on the island at any one time.
Mhm.
And that data is available. And then, okay, well, what you can get ferry data, you can get airplane data if you want to. You know how many people live here year round because you have census data, which may or may not be accurate, but there's some other data points. And then, okay, maybe everybody else is seasonal.
Mhm.
All right. And now we can figure out how many people are in the STRs. And if they're not in that category, then they're seasonal people who don't rent. So you can sort of see the whole picture that way. That's all I'm
Mhm.
suggesting.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think the thing, kind of like what Stacy was saying, is then what conclusion do you draw from that, and how do you
You
move that
realize how much of
into
an
a
impact
policy?
you can make by the policies you come forward with. And
Okay.
it might lead to policies that are beyond our purview, but they would be helpful to somebody in the town when they're planning.
Sure.
Here's the problem with this whole discussion, right? Is that it doesn't really matter, because if we decide that we are going to regulate STRs because of crowding, what people are taking for granted, which isn't true, is that, oh, now these houses are going to sit empty. Well, they're not going to sit empty. Someone's going to use them. So is that an STR problem? Right? It's not going to be resolved by having less STRs, because those houses and those bedrooms will be used by someone, whether it's an STR or a personal person, well, you know, it's whoever owns the house. So to say we're gonna solve the overcrowding problem by getting rid of STRs, no, those people are still going to use those houses. They just won't be rental houses.
But it's one of our policy objectives. I agree with you, but that's what is on our list right now.
Yeah, but we also had an objective to try to put two articles together. And that was our major objective. All this other data, I think some of it might be available from the Chamber of Commerce, but in reality, the majority of people on this island, or at least in our groups, have made up their mind. You know, they know where they stand. The point is now is to come up with a common ground between the two sides so that we can go forward with something. All this other data, it doesn't really matter, because we know there's a lot of people on the island in the summertime. We know, does it really matter if they're short-term rentals or not? I don't think so.
Mary.
I think we kind of need to focus down. I don't think counting ferry tickets is really going to help us with anything here. And that maybe we need to, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not the only place in this country that has to deal with this. And I know we all feel this way, but Nantucket is not special when it comes to this being a problem. It's a problem all over the country in all sorts of resort towns. So, I mean, I think that we just need to get down to it and start producing something instead of talking about how much more data we could collect. We could sit here and roll around in all of the data and still not make a decision. Like, let's move forward. We have some data. We have some key data questions. Let's let's move forward.
So I thank you for that. I think the things that people have talked about most directly connecting with STRs, in terms of the concerns people have raised, have really been about the removal of the availability of housing from year-round use, because people who want to live here year-round cannot afford the houses because the cost of the housing, the competing markets has made it less affordable because of STRs. Now, again, what percentage of STRs versus other people with more money who want to live here year-round, or other people with more money who want to have this as a second or a third home that don't need to rent it, right? To me, that seems like a question that would be helpful to know, that I think you can really get at if you look at this sales relationship over time that Jeffrey has been trying to put together, or is looking at assessor data to figure out, right? The extent to which overcrowding, as you all said, whether there is overcrowding, whether STRs contribute to overcrowding, I am unsure what data points you are going to get that is going to get you closer to agreement on any of those issues. So I'm open to hearing it. If there's something everybody says, yes, if we learned X, we would all agree to Y. Right? Like Dave said, the intensity of use, if we hear that the intensity of use is super high, a lot of turnover, a lot of days, a lot of leases, right? We may want to regulate that intensity of use, because that in itself has a negative impact on people's quality of life on the island, right? We can draw a connection between the data you want and the decision you then are going to agree to make, right? But I think we got to make those connections, or else we're just chasing data that isn't going to get us any closer to agreement, right? Given that you don't all agree on where you want things to go. Julia.
Thanks, Stacy. I struggle because I think a lot of us in this group are, love data, wish we had more data, and I certainly am one of those. And even when you look at what you just said, Stacy, which is true, like, if we had information about the loss of availability of housing to STRs, just looking at the sales, okay, if you did it over a bunch of years, great, you'd probably get some picture, but you're missing the rental market, right? So and then there is no visibility in the year-round rental market. We just know that we lost 40% of our year-round rentals in 7 years. We don't know where it went. And I mean, you'd have to, it's like finding a needle in a haystack, unless you're looking for housing and you've seen, the anecdotes, right? So I find that, I guess what I'm wondering is, I can't imagine that any community has ever had all of the data that they needed to really assess every angle to this issue. And to some degree, I think, if that's going to stop us from making progress, then maybe we use common sense in a way and start talking about how we envision the future for the island, as opposed to what more data can we not get that we need to make a decision that we won't make if we don't have data.
Okay, so what I'd like to do at this point, I have this list of questions. I think if people have additional questions that are specific data points that can be gathered through the work that Granicus does on the platforms, and the work and the information that NARAB has and might be willing to share, send me those over the next few days. And we will get them together. I will share them with Jeffrey, who will meet with NAREB, and will try to see what they can bring forward to the group. In the meantime, I would like to share what I got from members on our poll. And to just be clear about what this poll was, the purpose here was, as we are putting a policy together, I am really thinking of this as a stew, okay, or as a, I don't know what you want to call it, some kind of recipe that we are going to, it's going to have different pieces to it. It may be a very simple recipe with just a few ingredients. It may be a very complex recipe with lots of different ingredients, right? But I was just trying to elicit from you what are some of the ingredients. So those of you who are squinting at the screen trying to see these, they're a little hard to read. And I've realized that SurveyMonkey does a better job at letting me make graphs than Google Forms does. But nevertheless, this is what we have here that people said their priorities were. So a lot of people said their highest priority, though many of you chose more than one, even though I said choose one. A couple of you chose more than one. But nevertheless, a lot of you, 5 of the 9 said that preserving Nantucket character, traditions, community, and quality of life, whatever that means to each of you, is a highest priority for this policy. Beyond that, we saw, I think, really quite a mix. 5 of you said that the tax and fee income for the town is important and significantly impacted by STRs. So that seems like a pretty strong finding. I think we had 3 people say that traffic congestion, overcrowding, and strains on infrastructure they felt were important and significantly impacted by STRs, along with the loss of available year-round housing. A number of you said we need more data on this one. 3 of you on this, 3 of you on the cost of housing. 1 person said more data on noise, nuisance, other bad behavior. 1 person wanted more data on resident rental flexibility. We heard 2 people wanted more data on the impacts on tourism and what the impacts might be on people. So anyway, I'm just sort of reading the slide now. I'll send this around after so you all can see it and parse the data more meaningfully. Again, many people wrote comments like, how do we know yet? We don't know, we don't have the data. So take all that with a grain of salt. Okay, a couple other goals people noted, protecting the rights of non-resident owners who are not business corporations, and protecting the right to rent for all property owners through. So this goal that we didn't really name clearly, which is we want to protect people who are currently renting through STRs who are not business corporations. We want to protect their rights to be able to rent. Okay, so here's some ingredients that people named for possible policy mechanisms. So I tried to organize these by the categories, but they're imperfect. So who? A couple of people, I didn't put how many each of you said, how many people said this because we're just collecting ingredients, but a number of people said that they'd like to prohibit STRs that are not owned by a natural person or an LLC that's really just a ownership entity for a natural person. People also noted, a few people said something about limiting STRs to owner occupied and owner occupied at a minimum of 3 months a year. Some people said 6 months a year, or otherwise a 6-month long-term rental. And someone suggested on the WHO to grandfather existing STRs and to regulate or limit all new STRs. You'll see that comes up a little bit more later as well. So what? Limit STRs to single family homes or ADUs only. People suggested limiting to only one, or one person said 2 STRs per family. One person who said this suggested grandfathering, the other did not. Named an idea of increasing taxing or fees in some way for additional STR permits. That is, if you had more than one, you're going to pay higher fees or higher permit costs. In terms of the legality of this, there may be different ways to do it, right? And it may be, zoning commercial, it may be extra fees. I don't know. You'd have to sort of see what's legal there. Someone noted prohibiting fractional ownership in the zoning definition, capping the number of STRs by the beds or by the number of people during high season, placing a moratorium on new STRs. Some people said new non-resident STRs. Some people said grandfathering the existing. Consider a cap at that number or below, use attrition and new permits to maintain or control the number of STRs over time. Prohibit STRs as the primary use or exclusive use of a home in a residential neighborhood. Protect the right for homes that are used as a primary residence to be short-term rented. So these kind of went together as a suggestion by someone to prohibit primary use, but to protect the right for primary residents to short-term rent their homes, allow seasonal residents the ability to offset expenses by short-term renting in proportion with their personal use of the property. Where people noted allow STRs in residential districts in zoning bylaws, and then regulate their use by general bylaws. So that was just sort of a little bit of a how as well. Allow current STRs to exist in the zones in which they are currently located, but limit new permits in certain zones, perhaps after a moratorium or cap. Define STR caps by neighborhood to stop loss of affordable housing. When? So some suggestions: minimum stays, 3 days, enforced timeout after rentals of less than a week, limit STR contracts, that is number of leases, to 12 per house per year. And then a couple of people suggested this anti-flipping timeout period, to not allow, one person said 1 calendar year, one person said 3 calendar years. After a house is purchased, no STRs are. And then a couple of other suggestions people named. One was a temporary sunset clause on any regulations or zoning changes, so that we could see their impact before they become permanent. There was a suggestion to define owner occupied as at least 3 months. There was a suggestion to have a general bylaw that allowed the select board to promulgate regulations around usage. And then a suggestion to adopt the 3% community impact fee excise on STRs that could then go toward infrastructure, affordable housing, and other town priorities. So those were the suggestions that came up in the survey in terms of ingredients. So let me stop there and just open it up. Anybody want to comment on those?
Can I speak?
Sure.
Yeah. Can somebody explain to me this concept of owner occupied for 6 months a year, and then they're allowed to do an STR? Where are they supposed to go in the 6 months that they're renting it out?
So I have 2 people who already have their hands up. But Julia, do you want to answer that question since you have your hand up? Or do you not want to answer that question?
I had my own question.
Yeah.
I mean, as owner occupied is already in our zoning definition. It's already used for, I think, tertiary dwellings. And Dave Iverson might know, I think it's used for the accessory dwelling unit as well. And the idea is that there's someone physically living there, the owner physically living there for at least 3 months out of the year. But obviously that means that, either they're a year-round person or they're a summer person, or that's the idea.
Okay, so it's basically limiting STRs, essentially.
Well, that's
Because
what you asked what owner occupied means. That's what.
well, I just don't understand if you have 6 months long period that you have to be in the house. My question goes back. So it means you go to Florida for 6 months and then rent out the house for 6 months? I'm just confused.
It either means that, well, you tell me, like there are a bazillion million scenarios out there of how people use their homes. But
Yeah, I understand, but but making a
have-
regulation like that, what I don't know saying you, I'm just looking at this on the screen where it says who.
Right, so owner
Yeah.
occupied, if it's a tertiary dwelling, you have to live in the tertiary dwelling at least 3 months out of the year.
Well, we don't have that many tertiary dwellings, I don't think.
If it's an accessory dwelling unit, you have to live in the accessory dwelling unit. Somebody has to physically live there for at least 3 months out of the year.
Okay, it goes back to where do they go the rest of the time? That's all I'm asking.
Yeah. All right.
That was not my
Julia.
question, though.
Yeah, go ahead, Julia.
Actually, so it's not really a question. It's more like a clarification on maybe 2 slides ago, which is when you had a long list and one of them was fees. Sorry, the one with the long list. Yes, the long list. So one was fees in here. So increased taxes and fees for additional STR permits. I think a lot of people already know this. Massachusetts does not grant us a lot of flexibility in terms of fees. This is not Colorado. In Colorado, they have a very different set of rules from the state. There definitely is an ability to, like the short-term rental tax and maybe like a landfill fee, or I don't know, a couple of other marginal things, but it doesn't seem that, from what I understand, it does not seem that we have flexibility in that area, in terms of how we can price things. It's about how much the town is spending, processing the permit.
Julia, we could do impact fees. I think that we have the ability through the state law to do impact fees.
Jeffrey, is that something you can speak to at all?
Yeah, a little bit. There are, like, as she was saying, every state does things a little differently, and every place tries to finagle different things. Usually fees you have the some of the lowest leeway, because a lot of places say the fees have to be commensurate with the cost of issuing the license. You can do, I think sometimes you can do impact fees, although I think that's a little less common. You also see places, and this is one of the issues at heart here in New Orleans, is pricing either different fees or different types of taxes, depending whether you have a full-time resident or not. So there are ways to get at some of those things. You could also backdoor through some sort of vacancy tax, or you can raise everyone's taxes and then give a huge homestead exemption. There are some ways to do it, but the way it's written here, just in terms of fees, is probably not going to happen. You would have to get a little bit more exotic to get at some of that. Yeah.
And
Jeff,
I guess
you also talked about the commercial, whether a property is commercial or residential would be a
Yeah,
way.
assessment would be and again, lots of places have all sorts of limitations there, but there are some assessors to the degree they can through state law saying whether something is a residential or commercial assessment, or kind of coming up with a in-between place based on occupancy or whether it's a primary residence or any of that stuff.
And real quick, if I could, commercially owned properties cannot qualify for owner occupied. I think it says it right in the bylaw.
Thanks. Kathy?
Just a couple things. I think to clarify, what my understanding is that the fees have to be commensurate in Massachusetts with the permitting process and the cost of administering that. And then the additional fees, the additional taxes that can be levied, Nantucket has several choices according to Massachusetts law. They can have an impact fee, and there's that has to do with STRs specifically. It's with that legislation, and they can also have another one has to do with I don't know if it's sewer, water, something like that, another fee that can be added on to the cost. So these are fees that are paid, taxes that are paid actually by the visitors, because it would be included in and added on to the STR cost. So it's not paid for by Nantucket taxpayers, it's paid for by the people who visit and cause the impact. So there are two additional taxes that Nantucket could choose to take advantage of. Right now, the STR taxes that come to the town are, I think, the second or third highest single line item revenue right now after property taxes. It's not a big piece. It's like rooms and meals is, I think, 7% of the total budget, but it's a significant amount, and that could be increased. And it would provide money for all sorts of things to support affordable housing, to support whatever the town finds or feels is a priority. So I think that's, there we go. Thank you. 3% community impact, and then the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. Thank you, Thomas. So those are things that I think there's a citizens article. I know we're not supposed to talk about citizens article, but I think there is one there that says, let's put just 2/3 of the STR tax as it exists now towards affordable housing initiatives. So that's another thing that's out there to assist in that and so in resolving that problem. But the concern I would have is, and it seemed like nobody really cared much in that chart you had earlier about the impact of tourism. If we only have 500 beds in hotel rooms to house our visitors, and we say really impact the STR rentals, we will not have those revenues. We will not have that we will not have those tourists because there's no place for them to stay. So that's the concern. And people aren't concerned about the impact on tourism, but they are concerned about the income that's coming in. Those are connected. And I think people need to consider them both together.
Thanks, Kathy. It does make me wonder if we want to at least add to the data we're collecting something about town tax revenue.
I know that was sent to me. I know that it does exist. I don't know how well it breaks out. I think there's some way to maybe get it a little more, because right now it's very, very top level, right? It's just like the giant novelty check you in at the golf tournament. So I can look into how much we can break that out. You know, it's an important number to know. It is also an important number to know if you are talking about the impact on potentially funding affordable housing. Housing's expensive. And so it may be also useful to think about how some of that money is going to be leveraged maybe in new and interesting ways to provide housing, which I know even everyone is interested in. And there's a lot of creativity that can come with various kinds of incentives or various kinds of levers when you have some money dedicated to housing. So, but that's exciting to see. I mean, these are some really, really great ideas.
David.
Yeah, I just want to put kind of a little different spin on this. And I am 100% for regulation, meaningful regulation supported by data. But all of these things we're listing are taking away people's property rights, and we need to be conscious of that as we move down the road, is all I'm saying. Is that it's not just about, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. These are rights that people currently have. I know Julia may disagree with me on some of these, but still, that doesn't matter. At some level, these are rights people have, and we're talking about taking them away. So we need to not be cavalier and be very thoughtful about it. Thank you.
Yeah. And you know, there were a lot of suggestions around grandfathering and regulating, you know, regulating new, right? And I do want to say, like, if this group decided, let's find low-hanging fruit, let's move that forward. The stuff that like creates fear that if the longer we wait, the worse things get, right? If the group wanted to pick a, hey, let's all, like, can we all agree on something affecting new STRs that might, right, or something like that, right? You can really, that was part of the idea behind doing this poll. And I know there were complaints about the way I did this. And I did it this way because I'm trying to get people away from very positional ideas of this is what we need to do, and I'm wedded to it. And B, I was also really trying to get to see what kind of low-hanging fruit might there be in terms of what people were going to be able to support in the short term, and you know, potentially then take more time to look at you know, more complex solutions going forward. So just to leave that for our conversation in 2 weeks. David?
Quick
Is that an old
comment
hand?
or no, a quick comment and thought as we talk about grandfathering or pre-existing non-conforming is that we need to be careful about consequences here. And if we put ourselves in a position where we are creating pre-existing non-conforming properties, we're gonna create a parallel housing market here where those houses with that use is going to be more valuable than their neighbor's house. So I would suggest that we need to be very careful when we go down that road and have that in mind.
Yeah, though I think Jeffrey said you can have permits that go with the people, not with the house.
Right.
That
but
is, if you sell your house, your permit's gone, your house doesn't have that resale value.
you can do that through bylaws, but I don't believe you can do that through zoning.
Right. But the group can do it, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
All right, Julia.
I would agree with what Dave just said, that, you know, creating a secondary housing market. I actually had a discussion a long time ago now with the planning director in Kauai, who they had done grandfathering in 2008. I mean, before Airbnb was even a thing. And they have a different set of circumstances, even though it's an island that looks a lot, maybe you'd have a lot of parallels with Nantucket. Their residents never really took to renting their own homes. Just wasn't something that they did. So, and they have more hotel rooms than Nantucket, but still it was done. It was being done, especially by the second home market and becoming more of a commercial use type of thing. So they grandfathered the use, and let's just assume they had 2,000 in 2008. Today they have 1,992 or whatever. Like, the attrition has been pretty much zero. And in the market, those 2,000 homes, let's say the same home, and we talked about this in previous meeting, the same home next to the home that doesn't have the STR permit is worth 25% more. And it's just the way it is. So yeah, in zoning, it's a very difficult thing to do. Without like, I think these are conversations that are even beyond even, I would assume, like even what our group, like we need the lawyers in here. We need, people like maybe even, Judy Barrett's a great person to have. She's a veteran in the world of policymaking. Like the idea of even a cap, because I think that's what you're referring to. If it's not the grandfathering, it's a cap, or it's some sort of, equivalent in the general bylaw. It sort of invites like a really large, there's a rush, like, even though it's not zoning, it has a certain effect, kind of like zoning, right? So there's a rush to, everybody come to the gate. So now we had, what was it? I mean, I was actually kind of surprised by the number. So now we're at 3,000, whatever it is, 3,500. So now we're at, 5,500 or whatever the number of units are, because we're telling people there's going to be a cap. And then, anyways, it's not an easy answer. That one isn't either.
Got it. All right, so no easy answers, but we've got ideas. I want to turn now to, well, let me just briefly talk about next steps, and then we will shift to public input. So I think I shared this last time, but it's a little more specificity. I wanted to get on the calendar a subgroup meeting for next Monday. If we're going to have a public meeting, if we're going to try and stick with this timeline for now to see where we can get, if we're going to try and have a public meeting on December 13th, I was hoping I could get some volunteers to help think through what that would look like. What would you want that public meeting? How would we do outreach? How do we, I have some thoughts about what we might do, and it's of course going to change depending on what comes out of our December 5th meeting. But I just thought it would be helpful to have some volunteers to come and think through what a public meeting on our approach so far might look like. So I just picked a time and date because we would have to get this thing posted by tomorrow in order to have the meeting on Monday. So just a quick check. Anybody interested in this? Would anybody be willing to join it? You can sort of put your hand up. Okay, Thomas, Kathy, John, Peter. Okay, great.
No,
So-
but Stacy,
Yeah,
just to say, I could do any day next week except the 28th, because I'm going to be on a boat and back.
okay.
No.
All right, well, but so then we have Thomas, Kathy, and Peter. So and Karen, great. So we will, you're all welcome to come. We'll send you all the information, but I think that will be really helpful. We've set up our December 5th meeting in person and hybrid for those who can't be there in person. Which Kathy, I know you're one of those. We're going to come up with really creative ways to bring you in. So the meeting, we will have it on Zoom webinar, but we're going to be doing a lot of small group work. And so while the small groups are working, probably Kathy will do something like put you on FaceTime and put you in your group like that, or a separate Zoom thing. So you'll be able to really be in your small group. So we'll come up with creative ways for those primary members who can't be there. And members of the public will be able to sort of walk around or whatever who are present. Yeah, Kathy?
Bill Gardner is raising his hand.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm an alternate member to the committee, and Peter Kahn is off observing his wedding anniversary. But
Yes,
I
we
would
know.
toss his name in the hat along with Kathy. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Yes, indeed. Yep. And so we will find creative ways to, bring in our virtual members as much as possible, our hybrid members. But I think it'll really be valuable to all just have that time together in the room, in person, those of us who can be there. And the rest of these look the same. Again, this may shift as we hear different things about our deadline. And, as we, take the time we need to get the work done, I still think we should keep moving at the speed we can to see what kind of progress we can make. Kathy, did you have something else?
Yeah, I mean, in the agenda, you had said the virtual public meeting was on December 12th.
Let me look.
And I changed everything. So now it's the 13th.
Hang on.
Okay,
Yeah, no, it can't be, I can't do the 13th is the problem. That is why it is now on the 12th.
okay, but it says here on the 13th.
Oh, it says on the 13th, right? No, it's supposed to be on the 12th, sorry.
Okay,
Yes,
that's
it is on the
clarifying.
12th.
Thank you.
It is on the 12th. That is wrong. Let me fix it and put it back up. Thank you for naming that. Because that was wrong. Okay, with that, I want to open to public comment. So I know hands are able to be raised here. Kathy, did you have something else? No. John.
No, I'm done. Sorry.
Okay, no, the other John. You're muted, John.
There we go. John Delano. Thank you very much, Stacy. First off, let me just thank all of you and everyone on the panel, alternates as well as the permanent members, for the hard work that everyone's been doing. This has been an incredible exercise, and I know how much time everybody has committed to doing this. So thank you, thank you, thank you to everybody who has been involved. I must confess, I sometimes feel I'm in a bit of a twilight zone. I'm not sure where we've come from or where we are or where we're going. But I still remain optimistic that we can reach the consensus, that the 7 of the 9 of you can reach the consensus that we need in order to provide something meaningful to the folks of Nantucket. Like most of us, I do find data, and I stressed this when I applied for the alternate position, I really find data important and the request for data to be really fascinating. But as Jeffrey said, we need to tie the data to relevant facts. Or as John said, and many others repeated, what do we really need to know? And so I'd like to return to our first meeting discussion and refer everyone to page 6 of the October 11 summary, where we outlined a number of things that we felt were important as data points. We should not assume that vacation rentals are a problem without data to prove that. So to what degree do short-term rentals contribute to a whole range of problems, noise, traffic, quality of life, all kinds of things that we listed? Do we have that data, or is it impossible to get that data and we just continue on the basis of conjecture? Before we regulate vacation rentals, which many would say has been the golden goose on Nantucket since the 1880s, I am open to a variety of possibilities of regulation, but we do need to know what specifically does a particular regulation solve before, as Dave Iverson said so succinctly, before we take away somebody's property rights. And of course, as Karen stressed, ultimately, and this I know is a later discussion, we need to understand the impact of various, quote, solutions on the economy of Nantucket, and more importantly, I might add, the quality of life. So there's a lot of work ahead. I really have been impressed with the people who've been engaged in this and all your discussions. I know as an alternate, I have to keep silent. I'm so tempted to say something, but many of you just say, particularly the alternates at large, I agree with so much of what you've been saying. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I do appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Okay, so attendees, we're going to turn to you for public comment. I would like to ask, first of all, identify yourself, your name, speak to the topics that we discussed today. Please limit yourself to 2 or 3 minutes tops. Please, we ask you to also follow the group's ground rules and norms about respect for all. Okay, Mike Hurley.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted.
Just underscoring what John just said, because that was really what was on my mind. I think one needs to quantify the problems as well as quantifying all these various aspects of how the STR system works. So how many noise complaints, where can they be traced to it? And then test your policy against that as an example. You, Stacy, you very much brought up the main thing that's going through the minds of a lot of Nantucketers. And that's what are we doing to the affordable housing market people need to live and work here that may want to rent year round, stuff like that. What are the numbers there of the problem set? And what is the relationship specifically to the short term to that problem set? The other comment I'll make just and turn it over is this schedule that was proposed, this sort of fast track schedule, has a lot of people spooked in the process here, saying, how could we ever during vacation period, be ready for January 17th to meet the annual meeting schedule? And I think you need to take a little pressure off of that in terms of being open to, if we get there, great, but not let's not go crazy here, because people are spending a lot of unneeded emotion, and you don't need any more emotion than you've got over this issue in this town. Thank you very much. And thank everyone on the group for what you're doing.
Thanks, Mike. Before I go back to our attendees, Robin, I see your hand too. Sorry, I missed you before. If you would like to speak.
Sure, no worries. Thank you. I just think because, we've had this tug of war going on between data and, a lot of people screaming about the importance of data to drive the decisions, but yet we had a whole list of potential policy ways forward that we might go. And what I think is critical is that we understand the economic impact on the island of what some of these policies may be. For example, you had put up, okay, that STR should be limited to 3-month or 6 months residency. If you do that, just taking a straw poll, and granted we need more than a straw poll, but from what we know and the people we have talked to, if you have a 3-month limit, that will eliminate 80% of non-resident owner STRs. So again, that needs to be verified. But if you do that, looking at Jeffrey's data of 3,688 units, and let's take the more conservative end that it's 2 bedrooms, you are eliminating 50% of the vacationer housing stock, bedroom stock on the island of Nantucket. So the economic impact of that kind of a decision could be huge and have an impact on many people's lives, not just property owners. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Okay, turning back to attendees, Caroline Balzer. You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And thanks to all of you guys for all the immense amount of time that you're spending on these topics. I just wanted to say that as someone who taught undergraduate statistics for 2 years, I would like to remind Jeffrey of his stats lesson number 1, which is to ask the right framing questions before choosing the statistical models that are used. And lesson number 2 is to ensure validity and reliability before presenting your data. And therefore, as someone who was watching in this meeting, I was really alarmed that more than 45 minutes was spent delineating the data, despite his admitting that it was not reliable or not valid. And a number of the group members noticed that as well. So that was really remarkable to me. I think that reporting back to the working group using extraneous and erroneous stats like Granicus is doing is simply irresponsible, given the polarized factions that are trying to really work this out at this point. I'd also like to know, Stacy, if you have a working knowledge of statistics and proper data collection. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd put that a little on the borderline of not very respectful. So I think the point can be, the question can be asked without being disrespectful to individuals. Okay, with that, and it being 8:03, we are going to close out tonight's meeting. I want to thank everyone, all of our attendees for your attention, and all of our panelists for all of your participation. Again, on a tense and difficult, challenging topic, I think we're making our way through. So you'll get information from us about the subgroup meeting that will be next Monday. And then we will be preparing for the in-person meeting and the hybrid meeting on December 5th. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving, safe and happy, and look forward to connecting again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thanks, Stacy.
Thanks, everybody.